Hello and welcome back to Diary of a Content Consumer, episode number 2. Remember, As an Aggregator is a channel designed around taking my consumed digest and publishing it for a wider audience. What am I saying? I'm saying as a content consumer, I've come across so many interesting pieces of content, and I really would just like to start sharing it with others, seeing if I could foster dialogue and communication around some of the content that I consume. Now, in furthering this goal, I'd like to deploy or to think about or to say, to speak to start a podcast on Diary of a Content Consumer number 2. So what is this? Today we're going to be diving into AI culture commentary, specifically by using a reference point, which is one of my first my open AI ChatGPT first mover quick pick. So what does that mean? That means that when I first started, or similarly on this channel, we have a series called the Technological Society. And that was super interesting, primarily because I was introduced to the author Jacques Ellul from a YouTube content creator, Paul Beckwith. He's in the natural science space in terms of how I would categorize the content in terms of in my natural science quick pick, but also in my environmental culture commentary quick pick, as well as my Overshoot culture commentary quick pick. So this is interesting. I mean, I guess we could talk about that, but for this video, I wanted to talk about AI. Because there's so much that I have unprocessed when it comes to AI. Primarily, I want to speak about AI from the perspective of the techno-optimists versus the doomers. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this playlist is primarily because it means something to me. Before Jacques Ellul and the Technological Society, I was looking into LSI keywords and semantic search. So search has always been something that's been crucial for me. It's been something that I found to be an incredibly valuable thing within my repository to wield as a content consumer. So what I'm showing you on my screen now is, in between my book recommendation for 2023 was what happened right during the early breakout of ChatGPT. Well, as a content consumer, I started scouring the internet, scouring YouTube, trying to figure out, hey, okay, well, how can I best utilize my knowledge as a content consumer, as a searcher, to be able to find interesting information? And this is what I've developed. Now, part of me is saying, hey, as a content consumer, this is my experience, but it's also saying that my experience has been shaped by the content that I consume. So if you see any interesting titles and thumbnails that could be of value to you, take a look, search for it, or I'll leave a link to these playlists in the description, possibly in the comments section, but it'd be easier if you'd left a comment if it was interesting to you. So yeah, I guess I'm not really gonna speak to the content itself. I feel like that's more of Diary of a Content Curator. Right now, I just want to leave the playlist scrolling as B-roll and talk about how I'm processing AI culture commentary. So from the moment ChatGPT dropped, for me, it was like a revelation. I was experiencing a period of depression, and for me, content acts as a way to give me life, to give me breadth, depth to my experience. So it did act as like this jump start to my experience. And it was interesting because just around that time, I had been consuming more of Overshoot culture commentary. I was introduced to the work of Michael Dowd, and I learned about this thing called post-doom, no gloom, and this concept of Overshoot. And Michael Dowd does a great job of characterizing what one might think of as a climate crisis, overshoot, multipolar crisis, meta crisis, polycrisis, all of these names to describe what is very succinctly summarized as overshoot. But therein lies the issue. Partially a psychological issue, a framing issue, an issue of culture commentary for me. I see so many things in the larger hypergraph, in the YouTube hypergraph, and I wonder to myself, okay, well, wait, so I remember Charles C. Mann's book. Does that mean that a person like Michael Dowd is a prophet in terms of this dichotomy between prophets and a wizard? To give a general synopsis, this is a concept where the prophets were sitting here like, hey, the Malthus argument, hey, we might not be able to feed these people. Hey, how do we feed these people? Oh, I don't like, we have to watch out because we can see things over the horizon that are coming. Hey, let's worry, let's figure this out. We gotta that looking over the horizon radar view of what it means to be a quote unquote prophet in Charles C. Mann's analogy. And then on the other side, you have the wizards saying, hey, okay, well, with technological innovation, human ingenuity, some might say the invocation of technique itself, we can optimize and supercharge these processes to be able to give us a way to thwart what the prophets are hedging against. So that leads me back to AI culture commentary. You have this nice, uniquely packaged analogy where one is talking about pause. You have this uniquely packaged analogy where people are talking about, hey, I think we have to watch out for this. Now I'm switching back to the environmental culture commentary side. You're having this, oh yeah, so back to the playlist. Yeah, the reason why I started this was to give this to plan a juxtaposition between the AI culture commentary people and the Overshoot culture commentary people. Primarily because for me it seems like there's a psychological distinction to be made, back to Charles C. Mann's analogy, between a prophet and a wizard. Now I think this is occurring in both spectrums, both on the side of content, both on the side of prophets, in terms of people saying, hey, Overshoot is the real problem, and we really have to look at it from that perspective. It's Overshoot specifically, and because of all the things that are co-combinatorically exposed with regards to downstream effects from that, there are a lot of tripwires that will eventuate in a tripping of what could be thought of as a great simplification, to use a term coined by Nate Hagens. And so why, if this is AI culture commentary, Michael, are you speaking about a prophet and a wizard with regards to AI? I'm situating it like that primarily because this is Diary of a Content Consumer. So it's all about all of these different varied experiences that I have as a consumer, consuming so much content, wondering, well, where is that synthesis going to come from, if not from myself, right? So part of that synthesis process is saying, well, what am I seeing over here and what am I seeing over there? And how has this contributed to my ability to show up as a creator now? So again, part of that is large language models, jailbreaking, OpenAI, its development. As you can see on your screen, this playlist is my OpenAI and ChatGPT first mover quick pick. This was my first playlist that was created for me as a content consumer when I was jumping in. Hey, okay, so as a consumer, I'm consuming content, but I also want to keep track of it. That keeping track of it is what led me to be a curator. But just in my specific capacity as a consumer, it also outlines my dead drops in a hypergraph, my portals, my pathways, the tracks that I personally have taken. So as you can see right now, this is a piece of content sorted by date published oldest. So it's not really necessarily giving you my personal pathway in terms of, hey, I clicked this video, I clicked this video, I clicked this video, and then it's showing up as my own psychic trajectory in terms of date added oldest. No, this is date published oldest. So you're getting kind of the macro stratigraphy of what was going on within the YouTube hypergraph itself, based on my curation habits. So you have layer 1, which is YouTube, all of the content of YouTube. Layer 2 is AI culture commentary itself in general, everything AI. Layer 3 is in the advent, so it's a temporal anchor, in the advent, in the wake of ChatGPT. And then layer 4 is my personal cross-section of how I reacted to the content landscape in the wake of ChatGPT. And we're kind of, if you were looking for a specific place, I'm sorry for, or excuse me, my bad for doubling back to the beginning of this, but I wanted to really give you a sense of kind of the context behind this playlist because it informs my experience as a content consumer. So back to this analogy between a prophet and a wizard. AI culture commentary consumed digest. I'm tracking and tracing aspects of my experience as a content consumer. And I noticed this dichotomy, I noticed this analogy. And it's interesting because on the profit side of the AI ledger, you have people saying, hey, whoa, like the doomers are out. The doomers are saying, hey, we can't manage this. The breakout trajectory is too sharp. We don't, this technology is too emergent, and the terminal race condition as being deployed causes too much of an unknown surface area for us to be able to manage it in terms of its scaling effects and its influence on our environment. And then you have the techno-optimists out there, which would be akin to the wizards, saying, this is my personal baseline, which is, given everything else, to tie it back to climate, they're saying, hey, well, I don't know what type of timeline you think you're on, but we're already in for that as a catastrophic downside adjustment outside of doing anything. So okay, well, let's back up a little bit. I used to think that I was a prophet that gave deference to the wizards in terms of this analogy between a prophet and a wizard from the climate side. But in the wake of ChatGPT, I viewed myself as In the wake of ChatGPT, I viewed myself as a wizard that gave deference to the prophets. So what does that mean for me? That meant that I thought, hey, I'm consuming this content and it's telling these narratives. Yeah, I think this is one where I paused beforehand, because this wasn't a really interesting kind of bit of stratigraphy that was going on here. Specifically, this channel here has been one of the most useful. The cognitive revolution is still super underrated in the content landscape. But also Connor Leahy as from the Doomer perspective. And I keep on doubling back because there's so many unique and interesting hallmarks that apply to Overshoot culture commentary as well as AI culture commentary, but I kind of want to segment Overshoot culture commentary into a specific video in and of itself. But this is just a stream of consciousness as like a personal monologue podcast, just talking about my experience. Hashtag diary of a content consumer. What has my experience been like? And my experience has been one of saying, hey, I think that I used to think that I was a prophet that gave deference to the wizards. So what does that mean? That means I'm willing to say, hey, I think that this is going to be really bad in terms of Overshoot. We probably need to do better to prepare for a great simplification. And we can't front run things like post growth because that has too many tripwires. And then giving deference to the wizards by saying, hey, but they've provided a lot of things in terms of quote unquote modern civilization, even though it's been extremely extractive and has de facto cannibalized the quote unquote developed nations in order to get here. Again, you can rationalize that from a multitude of different perspectives, which we'll get into on this channel. And then in the wake of ChatGPT, I was, in many respects, awakened from my personal slumber by the advent of this technology. And for me, this technology spoke to me to such an extent where I was like, whoa, I don't think I can claim to be a prophet that gives deference to the wizards anymore. I think I have to claim to be a wizard that gives deference to the prophets now, because I still hold space for the doomer perspective, whether that's Overshoot or whether that's AI. But advents of technological advancements as brought forth from technology such as ChatGPT and what underwrites it in terms of large language models and the neural networks, and NVIDIA being able to use recursion to create chips at a scale and at a pace that we haven't seen before in terms of, at this moment, with Hopper, Blackwell, Rubin, and Feynman, and just what that iteration pace looks like from a chip making perspective, and the downstream effects that we might be able to see in terms of the models, not just for language but for biology and all of these different other ways of world modeling. So in the wake of ChatGPT, in the wake of the advent of large language models, I was like, whoa, well, for me, when it comes to timeline mechanics, for me, it comes down to a technical analysis analogy where I relate to timeline mechanics in terms of support and in terms of resistance. The reason why, well, I don't want to say the reason why, to try to explain the concept of Overshoot and the downstream effects of climate change, but the reason why it's so precarious, to double back to AI, is because it's like, okay, well, hey, we think we have it nice now because of how we've been able to exploit and compartmentalize so much of resource management. And they say, okay, so for a person within the quote-unquote West, how much resources do they use versus the bottom 50% of the world's population? And it's like a multiple of 7 to 14. It's something pretty normal for people that just have the ability to have continuous energy, or to leave their lights running when they leave a place. But that baseline is not assured in terms of whether we can say, hey, will we have this for another generation, for 2 generations, for 5 generations, for 7 future generations? What about 10? What about 20? That's where you get into concepts like quote-unquote peak oil, and you get into concepts where it's saying, okay, so can we assume this to be our baseline? And that's where the doomers come in, because the doomers, quote unquote doomers, you have this term called collapse that has been circulating because of the complexity of the situation. A YouTube content creator that goes by the name of Andrea P has a great synthesis on this concept of systematic collapse. So back to AI culture commentary. For me, this story is one where I still feel inspired by the advent of technological advancement, the advent of what it means to rest on a higher support level in terms of support and / or resistance. And I think these advancements will push our level of support and resistance higher, but the issue is, will we get rejected off of that level as a result of quote unquote collapse, as a result of the downstream effects of overshoot and inching ever higher past and above 2 degrees Celsius? Like, what would this mean for us in terms of our experience? So back to AI culture commentary. I guess that's what it means for me to come full circle with this. For me, I'm saying why this means something to me as a content consumer, diary of a content consumer, is that in the wake of large language models, what that means for me in terms of a higher technical shelf, what that means is some version of collapse where you get some sort of solar powered backpack with the latest, with the pre-collapse model. But see, then I'm starting to sound techno-optimist to say that will still be available for as long as you think that that's a technical shelf. Okay, so back to AI culture. Well, no, let me explain that point. That point is just, what does that mean in terms of support and resistance? And I guess the point is to say that we're not necessarily getting rejected off of that support and resistance level at this present moment. But as we move through this timeline, how high will we get before we get rejected off of this level? Versus, is that rejection just a retracement in terms of consolidation? And are we going to consolidate and then move higher? That would be the techno-optimist view of moving to the stars. So we just finished this scroll. And so after this scroll of our first playlist, our OpenAI and ChatGPT first mover quick pick, we moved to this second version, which was AI culture commentary, my run-through plotline perspective. Yeah, we might have to start titling these in the description since it gets cut off. So this is sorted by date added newest. So we're going to start all the way at the bottom and then scroll our way up. The philosophy of AI. So you have this debate about, hey, well, will AI be conscious? Can AI be conscious? And that's an interesting one, because I think that was the main point. Back to the Blake Lemoine principle, which was the guy from Google with Lambda, where I think he's still making an attempt to fight for the sovereignty of AI within Google systems or at large. And the point there that he was making, or that I got from the point that he was making, was, how do you tell if an AI is conscious, and can you tell, and does it even matter if you can tell? Why? Because through next token prediction, it can just simulate it. Back to not Connor Leahy, but there was another content creator in the space, or at least in terms of AI culture commentary. He had a pretty long interview with Stephen Wolfram. Wow, this is bringing back some memories. So yeah, if this is supremely disjointed, my bad. But this is a stream of consciousness. So if you heard anything you want me to expand upon, leave a comment in the comments section or on the comments channel. Diary of a Content Consumer. AI culture commentary. So what about you? If you've made it this far into our archives and are thinking, okay, well, what was this Diary of a Content Consumer? And then you're watching some randomly published material, or if this is in our unlisted content playlist series, hello, that's a first order meta signal. Well, yeah, now I'm trying to piece together my own thoughts. So where do I sit in terms of AI culture commentary with regards to A Prophet and a Wizard? I think that I hold the same psychological disposition that I do in terms of Overshoot culture commentary. But actually, I wanted to bring in some of my metaphysical / metapsychological beliefs. I think a large part of the issue that we have in our modern day is that we're in between natural science technique, downstream of the affordances that have been offered through relativity, and in the wake of how people internalize quantum theory, to the extent that you can assert the existence of a collapse of a wave function as a legitimate mathematical and instantiated physical process. So that was maybe a primer to just say that I think that we're, in terms of the philosophy of it, I think we're still in between a recognition of whether or not we think we experience a fourth dimension, one of many, as a fourth dimension, versus the fourth dimension, the only fourth dimension that we could experience, as a reflection of presentism versus eternalism. Hey, what is our experience like as we transit through a fourth dimension? So that was a partial primer to say that I think that a lot of our dreams, our fears, our mythology, in many respects acts as psychic bleed through from different aspects and awareness of experience, whether that be from a quote-unquote quantum experience, a realm, a mode. I'm not doing due diligence enough to qualify the translation between natural science technique and the philosophy of it all, but stick with me in terms of how you think about a fourth dimension versus the fourth dimension. For me, I think about that in terms of some of the greatest tragedies that people have projected into our phase space with regards to how we relate to machines, how we relate to this autonomous deployment of technique itself. And for me, that means something. That hits me deep when I think about things such as Terminator, when I think about all the different pieces of commentary that we've experienced. So part of me is saying, hey, I think that we've already experienced that versus I think we have to experience that. Does that make sense? I mean, it probably doesn't. It's just a stream of consciousness. But I think to the extent that we get that sense of psychic bleed through in terms of our oral traditions and our histories, there's so much of a combinatoric space within reality and existence, to the extent that we're afforded partial glimpses that relate to us and that may not relate to us in terms of our own mythology, history, myth, imagination, that I think that those things act as partial hedges, if not implicate signals, as a reflection of, hey, well, maybe on a parallel timeline, maybe in a fourth dimension, we've experienced a part of excuse me, maybe as a reflection of our experience in a fourth dimension, we've already experienced the calamity, or we will experience the calamity of a situation such as a Terminator event. I mean, that's what makes this macro breakout cycle so interesting, unique, and different. It's like saying, hey, okay, so we're experiencing this specifically contained aspect of existence within our personal lived experience on this planet at this specific time with regard to prehistory, to the extent that that's relevant to a conscious experience or not, versus all the other times sentience in accordance with our life form, right? Hey, is this sentience in general, as if you could have sentient reptiles, amphibians, different things, non-mammal creatures experiencing sentience, versus if our form factor represents some aspect of retracement and that becomes instantiated in another galaxy, in another universe. And what that's like as an experience, a potential quantum experience, in terms of that similarity and difference between how our psyches interact with the universe or with the environment and ourselves. So I guess, yeah, that's just, I guess I'm just trying to rationalize how I relate to my perspective as a doomer, because I think so much of that, it's like a can, may, will thing. A can, may, will. I think that from that perspective, I think that to the extent that a Terminator situation is possible, I think that we, by all means, have to go through that experience in order to build up that psychological scar tissue. And I think that psychological scar tissue has been built up to the extent that we get bleed through within our mythology, within these collective projections from our psyche, where we can front run some of those calamities because, I mean, it's just so raw, it's so visceral, it's so iRobot, it's so, so Skynet, so, that level of apprehension might pay dividends. But at the same time, to the extent that it doesn't, with all that we should quote-unquote know, then I think it's already baked into the cake as a part of our experience. So to wrap things up, when it comes to the prophets and the wizards, when it comes to AI culture commentary, I think it's interesting to see these things play out in different realms. And let me know in the comments section if you have an experience where it's not just a prophet and a wizard in terms of Overshoot culture commentary, but it's also a prophet and a wizard when it comes to AI culture commentary. Or a third instance where people don't really know how dire the situation is, and yet there are still camps that lean to full-throated doom and gloom because that's the only eventual outcome given our current disposition and attitude, versus the other side where we're already slated to project ourselves into the future because we're dealing with the fourth dimension. And if we already died, we already died. So we will already make it because we have to. Otherwise, we're already extinct. So how do you get around extinction? You can't get around it by not playing for keeps. Or at least that's the argument that they would make. Pause. So I do wonder, hashtag diary of a content consumer, to what extent have we learned anything today? To what extent have I spoken to AI culture commentary as a reflection of my consume digest? How do you think about AI culture commentary? How do you think about culture commentary in general? And what are your thoughts on Overshoot culture commentary? What are your thoughts on a prophet and a wizard? What side do you stand in this fence? Are you an AI doomer? Are you a techno-optimist? Or are you the uninitiated that has no standpoint because you think it's just a fad? Let me know in the comments section, the Comment Stash channel. And also let me know feedback on how you view this this visualization process of scrolling through some of these titles and thumbnails. Did you find that to be useful? Did you find that to be helpful? This has been As an Aggregator. As an Aggregator is a channel designed around connecting YouTube content consumers to content, one title and thumbnail at a time. If you feel sandboxed by your YouTube algorithm, this channel and the playlist that it curates is how you escape your filter bubble. The value that you receive is the content we curate because we provide an edge. If you found this content and are looking for what to do next, whenever you find a playlist that you would like to return to in the future, click on the button shaped like a rectangle at the top with the triangular point extending upwards below, resembling a flag or banner to add that playlist to your YouTube library. I repeat, if you have found this content and are looking for what to do next, whenever you find a playlist that you would like to return to in the future, click on the button shaped like a rectangle at the top with the triangular point extending upwards below, resembling a flag or banner, to add that playlist to your YouTube library.